The internet is home to some of the most compelling pieces of horror ever created. The horrors that the internet collective has created over the years have become vital pieces of the internet's culture, molding and changing what we all fear, sometimes molding to what we all fear. One of the biggest trends for internet horror is the corruption of innocence. The internet loves nothing more than taking something from our collective childhood and turning it into something sinister. This has been seen with Nintendo games, movies we've mostly all seen, and especially with cartoons. There is one cartoon, though, that has been the internet's favorite for this for a long time. This is the classic show, SpongeBob SquarePants. SpongeBob is a very popular show that is still airing today. A seemingly simple show about a sea sponge that has encapsulated multiple generations of kids. This means that there's a high chance that you grew up with it, making it the perfect choice for nostalgic horror. Even today, kids are growing up with the yellow sponge, and learning how the internet has twisted him, his world, and his friends. The earliest example of the internet's corruption of SpongeBob comes in the form of a creepypasta, one that I've talked about before, but is definitely the de facto starting point for this topic. Not only for the impact it had on the internet, but for the impact it had on an entire community. That story is Squidward's side. This story defined what a lost episode creepypasta was. It even showed the power of lost media, in a way. The dark side of the internet ate this story up and became a regular fixture in the minds of the creepypasta community. Before we go too deep into the effects the story had on the internet, though, we should probably go over the story first. Squidward's Side was originally written as a copypasta and posted on 7chan in April of 2010. It was posted to the X board and was quickly picked up by the members there. The story starts with an unnamed intern working at Nickelodeon Studios. He had a degree in animation and was excited for the chance to get some hands-on work with his favorite shows. This was also his chance to see early versions of episodes that wouldn't be released days or even weeks later. Which brings the story around to the current new episode of SpongeBob they just watched. They were invited to watch a copy of Fear of a Krabby Patty, a new episode for season 4 of the show. Since this wasn't the final cut of the episode, sometimes a fake comical title card would be used instead of the official one. When the title card came up, it was titled Squidward's. This didn't strike the intern as odd, but a little morbid. With the weird screen going by, the episode was ready to be viewed. The episode starts with Squidward practicing his clarinet, poorly at that. SpongeBob can be heard laughing outside his porthole window. Squidward goes and yells at SpongeBob, saying that he has to practice for a concert that night. SpongeBob says okay, and he and Patrick go to Sandy's place. The video transitions to the night of the concert. It looks like everyone in Bikini Bottom is here to see Squidward play. Squidward is performing poorly on stage, with a few frames of animation repeating themselves. The audio continues so the frame repeats until he's done with his song. The crowd begins to then viciously boo Squidward. The camera pans around the crowd and even SpongeBob appears to be booing him. The weirdest part, and one that everyone who knows this story remembers, is that the crowd had bloodshot, hyper-realistic eyes. They weren't CGI, but something close to it. The screen transitions again, and this time we're taken to Squidward's house. It appears to be the same night, just after the concert has ended. Squidward is sitting in his room, crying with tentacles covering his eyes. He just sits and continues to cry into the camera, while it slowly zooms in. There's no sound for this scene. Except, as I found out, there was sound. The sound of wind and Squidward crying could just barely be heard. The sound was slowly rising as the video continued to play until you could plainly hear Squidward's true anguish. Also in the background was a low laugh that would play at odd intervals. It was so low, in fact, that you could think that it was just your mind playing tricks on you. 30 seconds into this part of the video, and a single frame glitches before returning to Squidward. The lead animator stopped the video and started to rewind frame by frame. Eventually they saw what the single frame contained. It was an image of a dead child with the shadow of the person who took the photo in frame. They continued the video, hoping the image was some kind of sick joke. Squidward was shown again. This time the camera was zoomed in closer, and it looked like blood was streaming from his eyes. The sound of the wind was louder now, and was now joined by the snapping of tree branches. The laughing was now a deep baritone running alongside the other audio. Another single frame photo interrupted the video. This one was just like the last, only more gruesome. The shadow of the person taking the photo was seen here again. No police tape was anywhere to be seen. The screen was back on Squidward, who was now sobbing without covering his eyes. There was something off with his eyes. They were bloodshot and looked similar to the ones seen in the crowd from before. They're described as looking so realistic that if you reached out and touched the screen, your fingers would come away bloody. There were 4 frames of interruption this time. The same gory scene was being played out like before, a new kid, with an even more gruesome fate. This time though, it was different. The frames moved. They weren't just still images. The eyes of the boy blinked before cutting away. They went back to Squidward one last time. The screen was panned out this time, and Squidward had stopped crying. The sound was also gone again. Then, in a deep whisper, a voice said, "Do it." Before anyone realized what was going on, Squidward pulls a shotgun from off-screen and aims it at himself. The final screen is of the damage done. The walls are covered, and the remains of Squidward lie across his bed. It's a truly visceral scene that forces many animators to immediately leave the room the second it appears. This is the full story of Squidward. It's a story that captivated the internet early on in the creepypasta era. It was a story that inspired many of the copy aspects of it, especially the hyper-realistic blood and eyes, which would later become a bit of a meme in the community. The story was actually inspired by Mouse.avi and Dead Bart, both of which I've already discussed on this channel. You can see that influence with the unsettling nature of the story, the gore, and how the author took the core of the character and used it to his advantage. Another piece of inspiration would be seen in the plethora of stories that use the same idea of someone working on the show seeing something creepy. This can be seen in plenty of other lost episode creepypastas, like Crybaby Lane and the Black Friday Incident, both of which have the narrator be a member of the team who knows about some dark incident during the production of their movies. Though the biggest inspiration this story, and a few others that came out at the same time had on the internet, was showing the interest it had in the corruption of childhood media. Movies, books, games, and cartoons were all canvases that one could paint their distorted ideas onto. The internet has shown to love the twisting of their nostalgia. Twisting nostalgia is a theme that I've mentioned many times before on this channel. I discussed it when making my video game creepypasta iceberg, the lost episode iceberg, and even in my deep dive videos. There's something about the idea of corrupting our own childhoods that intrigues us all. Squidward said it wasn't the only creepypasta to attempt to twist the SpongeBob world either. There was another popular story called Plankton Got Served. This story follows a similar format, but instead of being an intern at Nickelodeon Studios, they just happened to catch an episode too early. The narrator says that they saw an episode as it appeared on the Nick website. The episode was a heavily altered version of One Course Meal, which was an episode from season 7 of the show. This episode is voted as one of the worst SpongeBob episodes of all time, for a few reasons. The premise of this episode is that Mr. Krabs finds out that Plankton is afraid of whales. He uses this to his advantage and terrorizes Plankton by dressing up as Pearl, his whale daughter. The episode was viewed as extremely dark and malicious. The narrator was loading the website on repeat as the episode was set to premiere. When it finally did appear, the title card was different. It was titled Plankton Got Served. The episode is essentially the same until the infamous scene comes up. Plankton has decided to sit in the street waiting for a bus to end his life, as he'd rather that to living in fear for the rest of his life. SpongeBob then shows up and explains that it was Mr. Krabs scaring him the entire time. In the original, Plankton believes him and he gets out of the street. In this version, he doesn't. The bus then hits him and the screen goes black. Plankton then is shown on a floating platform. In the darkness beneath him are whales, all looking up at him. Peering into the darkness, he sees members of his family. He can faintly hear their voices telling him to join them, to plunge into the darkness. Plankton, resigned to his fate, takes the plunge. This is where the episode ends, with the credits playing alongside Plankton's descent. The narrator reloaded the page to find that it was changed to the normal version of the episode, that everyone else had just seen. This story, while not as popular, showed that there were still people who wanted to twist the world of SpongeBob. The focus on Plankton for this story makes a lot of sense. He's another character who is down on himself a lot of the time, evil or not, which leads me to the last creepypasta I'm going to mention in this video. This one has gotten popular again recently, which is kind of surprising to me. The pasta is called SpongeBob Bootleg Episode. Now, SpongeBob Bootleg Episode is a story that's really short. Let me just read it to you in full, then we can discuss it. This image was taken from a split-second frame and a corrupted bootleg of the SpongeBob SquarePants episode Dumped. Other than the image, the rest of the video is composed of incomprehensible jumbles of colors, static, or just black screens. The audio seems to be heavily distorted versions of the audio from the original episode, with loud, droning buzzes occasionally interrupting it. The bootleg tape itself was found in December of 2004 by a group of 5 teenagers from the city rummaging around in a trash can within an abandoned mental institution. Of these 5 individuals, 2 have killed themselves, 1 has gone missing, 1 refuses to comment on the tape, and the last hastily agreed to give paranormal investigators the tape shortly after being interviewed about the suicide and disappearances of the other 3 persons. The current whereabouts of the tape are unknown, and many who stare at this image for a long enough period of time claim to see SpongeBob blink. And that's the entire story. It seems like a standard Lost Episode story. The image you've been looking at this entire time is said to blink. On the Lost Episode Creepypasta wiki, he does blink. It takes a while, but you will see it. The story focuses heavily on how the tape was found and the effect it had on those that found it. What it doesn't really talk about is what the tape actually shows. Besides this image, there wasn't really a lot to go off of. It was a creepy image but nothing more. That is until the story got a remake. There are people online that will take creepypastas and make videos out of their stories. In March of this year, fellow YouTuber Vibing Leaf created the bootleg SpongeBob remake. The video focuses on the episode itself rather than the story of the people that found it. The way it is presented is everything as well. It is shown as if we're in the room watching it, complete with a camera recording of the TV. It makes it appear like an actual bootleg recording. The episode is dumped from season 2. In the episode, Gary has left SpongeBob to live with Patrick. The video starts with a scene from the episode. It plays out normally until we get to the infamous stare from the image. It all pauses, with no sound. The screen seems to darken around the image of SpongeBob, then this happens. We cut back to a scene from the episode. It plays for a bit, then cuts to this again.
How sad. Even your own snail thinks that you are such a pathetic, needy sponge. Your lifelong friend, who was there since the days of your young age, has left you after finding someone better. You understand how pathetic that sounds, my boy? Do you understand?
We're finally brought back to the finale of the episode. Before it cuts to static, SpongeBob appears to be going to some dark places in his betrayal by Gary. His household pet leaves him for his best friend, or so it appears. The episode cuts before the real ending, which makes it all the more sad. This video brought on a new level of interest in the story, though the focus being on the episode in question was far more interesting than what happened in the original. The way the video also makes it appear that we're experiencing it ourselves is perfect. This isn't the only creepypasta that Vibing Leaf has created a video for either, because of course he created a remake of the first one. Red Mist Retake is a recreation reimagining of that original story. The title is Red Mist, which is what it was called by members of the community. The name is a little more interesting, also easier for the algorithm. Red Mist Retake starts with the title card of the same name. The low fidelity screen really gives off analog horror vibes. This feeling persists throughout the entire video. It's probably safe to say that it took a bit of inspiration from both the original internet horror trends and the newer ones. The scene transitions and we have Squidward practicing his clarinet poorly. Then there's a knock at the door. It's the bagpipes fish asking if Squidward would be interested in something, which he doesn't get to say because the door is closed in his face. The knock happens again and Squidward goes back to answer it. This time the bagpipes fish is close to the screen. His eyes are completely black and he tells Squidward, "Please save us from the red mist." He continues, "The red mist is coming." The fish then vanishes, like he was never there to begin with. There's quite a few interpretations of this, but we'll get to those later. Squidward goes back inside to practice and then yells at SpongeBob and Patrick for goofing off loudly near his open window. This transitions into the concert that night. Just like in the original story, Squidward has been preparing for this show. He welcomes the audience and hopes they have a great show together. He starts to play and the crowd seems uninterested or even revolted. They get up and start leaving. This leaves Squidward all alone on the stage. He begins to cry as the world around him goes to darkness. This continues until we see him walking home alone, defeated. He gets in bed, looking beyond upset, before the screen goes to black. The next scene is a foreboding one. The outline of Squidward's home, along with SpongeBob's and Patrick's, are seen. They are complete shadows against the red sky surrounding them. This is probably the single best shot from the video, really showing the red mist. Squidward looks scared in his bed. He peers over at the red light streaming through his porthole window. There appears to be some shape obscured by darkness just outside. He walks over and peers into it. For a second, there's a smile on his face. Then a corrupt image appears on screen. It goes back to Squidward, who is also now corrupted for a second. He has a painful smile on his face. Another image, this image slightly obscured by a black box and the number 1 in the corner. Back to Squidward, who now has his head in his hands. Notably, the world around him appears to be distorting. The background goes black before Squidward looks up with a very familiar image. His eyes are full of pain and bloodshot. There appears to be a darkness surrounding his features. This is the red mist affecting him. He peers down a long hallway now, and sees a distortion of his shadow. This scares him and he falls back from what he's just seen. The distortion gets closer and appears to be more than just a shadow. Image 2 pops on screen, also obscured by a black box. This lasts only momentarily before we're back to Squidward looking terrified on the floor. The shrouded version of himself is getting closer. The next shot shown is of Squidward's dresser, and on the side is a shotgun. The frame holds there until the screen goes black. Only the vague outline of the shotgun can be seen, until that fades too from the screen, leaving us with a third image with multiple boxes covering it. A shotgun sound can be heard and the screen has gone completely red. The red fades and the final image of Squidward can be seen lying limply against the wall. An image that I likely can't fully show on YouTube, but one that is so visceral and haunting. The scene plays out next, and I don't know if words can do it justice, so here it is in full. The final scene of the video has SpongeBob and Patrick having a conversation on a cliffside. Patrick is having a heart-to-heart with him. This moment between the two shows us a few things, but it's really just showing that Patrick's there for SpongeBob. As the two talk, there's some distortion seen on SpongeBob's face, but those slowly fade as the conversation continues. It's such a somber piece of the video that I think really contextualizes the horror of what just happened. Then the video comes to an end with these three. These are the 3 kids in the original story, the ones that were found murdered. They were the distorted photos that Squidward saw during his mental descent. That's the end of the video, and there's a lot to talk about. This video is one that can be analyzed to no end, and rightfully so. It has a lot to tell in such a short amount of time. Starting at the beginning, the fish that shows up to tell Squidward about the red mist can be multiple things. The most literal one is that the red mist is some sort of dark entity that can affect those that are already experiencing hardships in their life. Squidward is already a pretty depressed character. He's always down and doesn't seem to be able to find the good aspects of life. He's downtrodden, and this is why he was chosen for the original story. The red mist can also be interpreted as a Zalgo or Cthulhu-like entity, one that spreads a virus of the mind that preys upon those most vulnerable. This idea comes mostly from outside sources, such as the origins of the red mist story. Zalgification played a big part in the early art styles of many creepypastas. This could be a factor, but isn't the most likely. The final interpretation is that the fish wasn't there at all. It was just a figment of his imagination, for the anxiety that he was feeling. He was about to play his first concert, one that he was both excited for and nervous about. This could be his big break, or it could be his next big fall. The actual concert here is the final breaking point for Squidward. His lifelong dream comes crumbling down. In that moment, it is both shown and assumed that he is hitting his lowest point, a point from which he doesn't know how to come back from. The red mist then descends upon the neighborhood. Squidward tries to smile through the pain, even as he sees these horrific sights and experiences those feelings. The images of the children here are likely not supposed to be literal, more like dark manifestations of his collapsing psyche. The most literal take is Squidward accepting his losing battle with a twisted version of himself. He sees it closing in on him, until the two become one. This is when Squidward picks up the shotgun and follows through with the red mist's plans. The images of the children have too many interpretations to go through them all. They could even just be pieces to connect this reimagining with the original, not meant to be taken to the literal of his decaying mind, or they could be exactly that. That's kind of the whole point, to interpret it and share with others. The final scene where SpongeBob appears to be corrupting until Patrick says that he's there for him was showing the red mist trying to take its next victim. Only, it wasn't able to thanks to that moment. The whole video is rather somber. It mixes scares with a message to be there for each other. It takes that original and does a lot more with it, making it kind of a definitive version of the story. It was scary but also emotional. The imagery of Squidward's anguish really does push the horror though. They are visceral, bordering on the art of those experiencing the real world equivalent. They are hard to look at, but also so real. These remakes of the original creepypastas that Vibing Leaf is doing are a perfect reimagining of what the peak of these stories could be. They really could bring out that horror that we all felt exploring this side of the internet. In a way, these are what they could have been all along. Squidward's would have a lasting effect on the internet. It'd become one of the most known pieces of internet horror. It spread from community to community. It even had a quick appearance in an actual episode of SpongeBob, which was later removed in reruns. This corruption of SpongeBob was just the starting point, though. The internet was taking it further. In 2019, a post was made on the I'm Sorry John subreddit. This subreddit is a Garfield sub, well, kind of. It's something I will probably do a video on later. The sub is full of corrupt versions of Garfield, but also does a non-Garfield weekend. That's when this comic was posted, by Stillinthesimulation. It shows a demonic version of Patrick killing and eating SpongeBob in a very true-to-nature way. This was only the start of what would become a full web series. It was called Bikini Bottom Horror, and it still stands as one of the most unique and dark versions of the world of SpongeBob. Its popularity would lead to its own subreddit, website, and community, even a remake on YouTube. The comic started as this one-shot, but quickly became a whole narrative. Patrick was going to kill everyone in Bikini Bottom, but he was specifically targeting Mr. Krabs. This was for the sole reason that Krabs was hiding a dark secret. One about the Krabby Patty's secret formula. Mr. Krabs was actually making Krabby Patties out of the meat of the regenerating Patrick. Patrick had lost a limb at some point prior to the story, and Mr. Krabs stored it in the basement, and had it regenerate forever for an infinite food source. Eventually Patrick ate an undercooked patty infused with the mind of his tortured self. Known as the Tortured One. The story goes to some pretty dark places, but becomes a zombie storyline pretty quickly. Honestly, it's all kind of worth it just for shots like this one. This isn't even the worst it gets. The gore becomes increasingly haunting with each chapter. Some of my favorites are the alien homage of the mini starfish popping out of Mr. Krabs, the devouring of plankton, and the death of Mermaid Man. The latter being probably the darkest of the imagery. It really gives off Marvel Zombie vibes, which is one of the darkest comic runs they've ever done. The twisted imagery keeps going with a cult created by the Tortured One, which is the name of the Patrick that was being used for food. There's also this otherworldly, almost H.P. Lovecraft depiction of the insides of Patrick. It seems to draw you in with depictions of what you want. It's almost eldritch in nature and sees into the minds of both Sandy and Squidward. It could even be compared to the creature from It by Stephen King, which feels like a direct inspiration. The body horror also doesn't pull any punches here, with scenes of characters being fully devoured and the Patricks having their brains ripped out. There's plenty of blood, gore, and a whole helping of nightmare fuel. Probably my favorite image from the entire comic is this one. The Tortured One has created this massive horror from the flesh of those eaten and the other Patricks. Standing beneath him is the enlarged form of Squidward, trying his best to fight off the monster. This image is eldritch horror to its core, and drives home that feeling of helplessness and how minuscule they all are compared to it. It feels like no character is safe from death in this story. We see several characters die, from important side characters to main ones. Mr. Krabs, Plankton, Bubble Bass, and even SpongeBob meet their gruesome ends. The feeling that anyone can die is part of the horror of it all. The story goes in some crazy directions and even has a definitive ending, one that leaves you asking questions. I don't want to spoil the ending, because I think it's a read that everyone should do, especially if you enjoy the twisting of childhood classics like I do. The horrors that people come up with astounds me, and you should check out more of Stillinthesimulation's work. They have other comics on their website as well. Bikini Bottom horror is something you'd expect from the bowels of the internet. Body horror of our favorite childhood shows. Yeah, that seems right up its alley. This comic series just goes to show how popular these sorts of things can be. The first post has almost 100,000 upvotes. It reminds me so much of that Marvel Zombies run I mentioned before, which also took something from our childhood and distorted it. Lost media is the final topic I wanted to explore here. Lost media sits in a weird spot for internet horror. While most lost media isn't really horror adjacent, the whole idea can be a bit unnerving. The thought of thousands of pieces of media not being around anymore is kind of dark. Lost media and SpongeBob also kind of go hand in hand. The popularity of SpongeBob has led to many different searches for all sorts of lost media. with one of the most popular early pieces of lost media being A Day with SpongeBob SquarePants. This was for many considered the holy grail of lost media, a lost mockumentary about a child who gets to spend a day with SpongeBob SquarePants. The premise alone was enough to stoke the interest of many different communities online. This all comes from an Amazon posting with this image. A child is jumping in front of what looks to be a square version of SpongeBob's Pineapple House. At the top were these quotes from people who had reviewed the film. Alongside it was the name of the company that created it, Envato Films. This image is what started an internet search that took the lost media community by storm. Many different groups were banding together to find anything they could about this film. Reddit, Facebook, Lost Media Wiki users, and 4chan. 4chan were actually the first group to find anything related to the film. They found out that the kid on the front of the case was actually just a stock photo. It was also then found out that the quotes at the top were all fabricated as well. The final big piece was finding out the film company on the box, Envato Films, was actually just another name for a different company, that being Regal Films. Regal Films was then looked into. Users found that the company was headquartered in a mall food court, and it just got weirder from there. After all the search efforts and everything came to a head, it came out that the film didn't exist. It was an idea, a thought, but never got off the ground. Members listed with the creation of the film were contacted, and they said they were going to crowdfund the movie, but never did. This was the first real piece of SpongeBob lost media to take over the internet, but it wasn't the only piece. A really popular search was for the original airing of I Was a Teenage Gary. The episode is infamous amongst fans and many of us who watched this episode growing up. The episode is a scene where SpongeBob is turned into a snail when he accidentally gets stabbed with a syringe full of snail plasma. This then leads to SpongeBob slowly acting like a snail before having a whole transformation sequence. SpongeBob turns fully into a snail, like a scene out of a werewolf movie. The lost media for this episode comes with the ending of the episode. Squidward accidentally stabs himself with the same snail plasma and becomes a snail too. There's a screen fade before we see him in his snail form. Some people online claimed that they remember there being a transformation scene for Squidward as well. Believers in this piece of lost media claim that the scene was removed from later airings for being too gruesome or taking up too much time. The biggest piece of evidence to this belief was the way the transition was different than usual transitions. This was enough for people to believe there was a piece of lost media to find. It would later come out that this scene never existed. It was supposed to appear in the episode, but was cut from the script and never even storyboarded. This was a dark piece of lost media that never actually existed. One that did actually exist comes from my favorite episode of the show, Graveyard Shift. This episode has the Krusty Krab staying open for 24 hours now, which means SpongeBob and Squidward have to work the night shift. They now work both shifts, which means they technically never stop working. There's a deleted scene cut from the episode that introduced a new character. His name was Floorboard Harry. He was literally a walking floorboard. He was supposed to appear in the episode twice, once when SpongeBob feeds him, and later flickering the lights. Instead we got Nosferatu, which is still one of the best gags in the show. There's one final piece of SpongeBob lost media that was discovered recently that I want to talk about. It was one that no one was really looking for either. It's called SpongeBob Behind Closed Doors. It is a book which contains a series of lewd, crude, and adult drawings of the characters. These drawings were done on sticky notes by the actual artists who worked on the show and stuck to the back of the door, thus the name. A whole book's worth of these images were found, but not all of them were posted online. I can't even really show you the images, but it feels in line with a lot of the childhood ruining other content we've covered in this video. Even more so since there's an air of legitimacy to them with the original artists drawing them and all. This was all done in 2001, and it's quite common for artists who work on children's shows. This is a way for them to let off steam, to make something not so kid-friendly. All of the artists were given anagram names so that hopefully no one could figure out who actually drew what. Looking at these images is enough to ruin anyone's childhood. A few of the images are available online, but I have to give a warning before anyone seeks them out. They are not suitable for everyone, that's for sure. The internet has taken heavy strides to corrupt SpongeBob in whatever way they could, from creating creepypastas, creepy animations, and comics, to searching through the history of the show. There's always something dark connected to this show. Who knows what the next piece of disturbing media will be from the SpongeBob community? Thanks everyone for watching this video, and special thanks to my Patreon supporters. Blow a Nose, Victor Estrada, Nora Kingsley, Icy Dice, Ryoma, Bazingle, and Hamster. I know it's been a while since we've done a video looking at the internet's corruption of media, but I'd love to get your opinions on what series I should tackle next. I'd like to make this a series, but I need to see what everyone is interested in seeing. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you all have a good night.